What would be your reaction if your country finds a treasure worth $300 billion? A shipwreck worth $300 billion was found in the China Sea, but all of a sudden two nations claim to own it. The UK helped China in taking the precious items on the shipwreck out and later claimed that it owns a share. At that time, China was not able to do anything, so it helplessly gave its share to the UK. And after many years, China has finally proved that the shipwreck was China's property. But how did China prove it? Was it China's property, or did the UK own a share? Let's find out. An ancient shipwreck was found in the China Sea that is worth $300 billion. The shipwreck named Nanhai is more than 800 years old, but it has not yet decayed. Many artifacts and precious metals were found on the ship that is worth around $300 billion. But after the discovery of the ship, a dispute between China and the UK started. The British consider this ship as their property without any evidence. But to find out which nation this ship belongs to, one must know the mystery behind it. Many centuries back, there used to be long silk roads all around the world. The routes were used for the transportation of trade. It helped China to trade with the entire world. And on one of the routes, a merchant ship sank. The ship was carrying a lot of precious goods at that time. It sank between 1127 to 1279. Keep the dates in mind, because in the end, it will help in finding whom the ship belongs to. In the 1980s, the ship was found in the China Sea in a survey. The explorers were amazed to see this undecayed ship. The precious items on the ship were still there. And after much calculation, it was considered that the items were worth around $300 billion. China wanted to take this shipwreck out, but at that time, China's technology was not sufficient to take the goods out of the sea. China needed someone's help, and it asked the UK to help China. The UK's technology was good enough to help. China spends a lot of money on the UK's team. The entire process cost a lot of money, and more than 400 million yuan were spent on the UK team. But after the precious items were out, the UK claimed the ship to be its property. The UK mentioned that the ship was on the route that was used to travel things from the East India Company to China. And as it belongs to the East India Company, the UK also owns a share in the ship. Now, China found itself helpless, because the UK had the developed nation's support. The UK auctioned a lot of goods found from the ship and earned a huge amount of $20 million. Not just that, but it also became the world's most successful treasure hunter of the time. China was not able to do anything. All it could do was part ways from the UK and research on its own. China kept saying that the shipwreck belonged to them, but no one was ready to hear it. So the question remains, which nation did this shipwreck belong from? Before we continue further, tell us, are you loving the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel for more videos about China's development, power, and influence on the world. Let's continue now. There is much evidence that proves that the shipwreck was China's property. Firstly, the ship sank in 1100 to 1200, while the East India Company was established in 1600. That means there is no way the ship was carrying items belonging to an East India Company. The time of the incident proves that the UK does not deserve a share in the shipwreck, and for the efforts it made to take the items out, they were paid by China. At that time, no one was supporting China. In simple words, China had no power to stop the UK from stealing its property. Even if China had the evidence to prove that the shipwreck belonged to China, it was still not able to get it. Secondly, the items that the ship was carrying were made in China. Many artifacts belong to Chinese culture. That means the ship was traveling from China. It was originally China's property. The stuff that the UK sold was also sold as China's rare and old cultural items, but the money went into the UK's pocket. Apart from gold and silver, all the items belonged to Chinese culture, and the UK knew it very well. But again, due to its power, it easily snatched these items from China without anyone questioning. Lastly, the ship's anti-corrosion property tells a lot about its origin. In ancient times, many nations used to trade goods, but China's trade system was better than anyone else's. It had especially made routes for trade, and the entire world was using those routes. China is known for its trade, and making goods is not new. It has followed the legacy over centuries. The reason why it still relies on trade is because of its history. In ancient times, the people of China were as hardworking as they are now. And China especially used to make ships that were anti-corrosion. The ships used special metals that do not decay in water, and only China could make these sorts of ships. The shipwreck found in the China Sea also had the same properties. The ship can only be made in China, and this proves that the ship was traveling from China. The items as well as the ship belong to China, and it was also found in the China Sea, so there is no way the UK owns any share in the shipwreck. But the question is, why did the UK steal this shipwreck from China? The UK not only earned a lot of money from the ship, but they also earned the title of being the world's best treasure hunters, even if they were hired to do it. This highlights the unfair use of power as well as the act of stealing other nations' artifacts. In the 1980s, China was struggling. It was working on itself to become what it is now. It has no power to stop the UK from stealing its items. The West has always used its power over countries, especially China. Many times China was attacked and was left ruined. The hardworking people of China rebuilt it again and again. China has always been a place of treasure, thus a favorite Western spot to attack. And the West was known for its loot. If you are thinking that China was the only target of the powerful nations, then you are wrong. Many nations are affected by the loot, and in some ways, some nations still feel suppressed. If you have ever studied history, then you know how powerful nations used to force other nations. The poor nations were not able to do anything. And even in 1980, just around 4 decades back, it was still the case. The unfair use of power was still there. And if you look at China today, you will understand why China is working on changing the world order. China's history makes it easy to understand why China wants to help the powerless and why it does not support the powerful unfairly. China knows exactly how the powerful nations use their power against the poor, and it is not letting it happen now. The West has stolen many pieces related to one's history. There are still many artifacts that are originally from other nations, but are sitting in Western museums. More than depicting history, these pieces tell about the loot of Western nations. It tells how unfortunate some nations have been in the past, and present conditions make a lot of sense. All the nations aligning with China to change the world order and keeping their distance from the West make complete sense.